my father. He is now in hell for eternity as a traitor to his country. It is said that those who commit treason and betray others occupy the lowest pits of hell for all time.
These were the chilling words uttered by Justin Mohn just moments after he fatally shot, then beheaded his own father, and displayed the severed head on YouTube.
Charges have been filed in a gruesome killing in Bucks County. A man was found decapitated in a home. Police took his son into custody 100 miles away, and they believe there was more to this murder than just a family grudge.
On January 30th, 2024, residents of Pennsylvania were shocked to learn the details of this disturbing family tragedy. A year and a half later, the adult son behind the killing has taken the stand in a murder trial that prosecutors described as something straight out of a horror film. Here's everything we know about the brutal beheading and the crazed conspiracy theories of the accused. On the third day of his trial in suburban Bucks County, 33-year-old Justin D. Mohn coldly told the court how he fatally shot his dad, Michael Mohn, age 68, in the head during a, quote, citizen's arrest. Justin was living at home with his parents in Levittown while he was looking for a job and apparently becoming radicalized. I unfortunately had to use deadly force, he said in his testimony, which eerily echoed what he told Philadelphia's NBC 10 in September of last year.
Well, I wasn't expecting this. I had a speech ready, but I don't have that speech on me. A lot of other people around America believe that the federal government has betrayed America. They're destroying the country, and we have to do something to take our country back.
What does killing your father have to do with that?
Well, he was a federal employee and betrayed me. I was trying to perform a citizen's arrest. He resisted that citizen's arrest. It's lawful to use deadly force in that event.
Justin testified that his dad had threatened him and tried to take away the 9mm handgun that he purchased the day before. He said he believed his father was trying to stop him from becoming a charismatic political leader like President Donald Trump. Justin painted his political beliefs as different from his parents, whom he described as being on the far left. He also explained that his dad was a martial arts expert with 2 black belts. Michael Mohn was a respected civil engineer who spent 20 years with the Army Corps of Engineers. But in his seemingly emotionless 2-hour testimony, Justin said, "I would object to calling it a murder," and claimed that killing his dad was his plan B and that he knew his YouTube video would go viral. His sick video rant indeed spread like wildfire. In the nearly 15-minute speech, Justin said he needed to kill his dad to inspire others to join his movement to overthrow the government. His tirade spanned everything from immigration and the border to the war in Ukraine. True crime aficionados, including popular YouTuber Ray William Johnson, have since pored over the grisly details.
In that video, he holds up his dad's head to the camera to show everyone. And I promise you, whatever you're imagining this scene is, it's worse. I've seen the video and it's f***ing gruesome.
A judge will soon decide the fate of Justin Mohn, who faces both murder and terrorism charges.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our episode today of Connecting the Dots. We're going to talk a little bit about the revelation of the method, and I have with us, as usual on Friday, Catholic State and John Carter's joining us from his ranch in Brazil. So before we get started with this episode, I am going to show you the thumbnail so we get a little idea of what we're talking about here. I'm going to tell you what we're up to. We are actually doing our Memory Hold Friday edition. And this week, we're talking about the book Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare by Michael Hoffman. It was a book written in 1992. So we thought we'd pop up here to YouTube and give some general impressions of the book before we kind of go over, because I think it's important for the times that we're living in to kind of think about things like the Diddy trial, the Epstein trial, perhaps even things like the Texas flood and events going on around the world. We know, for example, right now, churches are being bombed in Gaza, in Syria. Christians are being killed in both places. That's not a highlight, but the stories over and over on the mainstream media, the controlled alternative network, Catholic influencers, not going to hit on them too much today, but what is going on in the sense, like what's happening to the collective mind, or what Michael Hoffman would suggest, what is this collective brainwashing? What is the ancient alchemical technique that's being used? How can we identify it? And how could we maybe help ourselves resist this demonic force that wants to get us into a dark group mindset? So before I continue, I want to just highlight this week. We had an absolutely sensational week on locals. Links will be in the description. On Monday, we went into the very essence of the nature of order. One of the big things we're trying to get through right now is this taking and transitioning from the Christian empire into the New World Order. And so we're looking at how the very essence, so we're moving from Christian order to anti-Christian order, from the church to the anti-church. And again, that what I sometimes reference is the 1947 expression used by Bishop Fulton Sheen, that the New World Order, the anti-church, will have a lot of the elements of the original, but they will be emptied of their essence. So we really looked into that transition from the church to the anti-church, from Christian civilization to the impending New World Order. And at what point, how do we identify our attachment to, and the show went over very well. I had a lot of comments on it, and it was very big. But one of the key things that we're asking here is, what's the essential goal of the Antichrist system? And we delved into that to kind of tie this together. It is the creation of a slave system. It's world enslavement. And we did talk a little bit about my concerns with actors on the world stage, like Steve Bannon, just to give you a little bit of highlights on the Connect the Dots. We went into some of the information we're going to do today and briefly show you so you can get some idea, because the show went over very well and it was very popular. I encourage people to go down there. Again, if you want to have access to the community post, see the videos, it's $5 a month. And that's the locals link down below. So I am doing a little bit of pitch for that. And I want to give us a heads up. We are doing a video with Professor Bezerra. And this week, John Carter, our guest today, will be the translator. And we are going to look over the enslavement agenda. And he's come up on his channel with just a brilliant way to suss out the different threads between Kabbalah, Talmud, Zionism, and Noahide. So we can see how they come from different angles, but they come together. And it really does cross over with the information we're discussing here. Inside of this empire of spectacle with its demonic ontology, we have these isms, these paradigms of ideology that trap us and move us. And he's going to help us suss that out. And again, I think he's probably, for my money, the lead expert in Noahidism and really connecting these various dots together. So that's what we have for you today. And in brief, I had the introduction video. Now I watched that for the second time. It does look like a classic psyop with all the background and the conspiracy theory knucklehead. But one of the themes that Michael Hoffman had in his book in 1992 was the scenario of the lone nut that can go all the way back to JFK, but you even think of Abraham Lincoln and Garfield and a host of other characters that come in and build this psychodrama. And one of the themes is the sort of the killing of the king essence that goes into the event itself and how it shocks you and trips you. And when you thought about this kid holding up his dad's head in front of a YouTube video, you're kind of going like, what? And it shocks you. And that's an ancient alchemical technique, the literal killing of the monarch. But there's kind of other variations that you can do in our kind of modern setting. And so it's a suggestion. He's killing his own father. And typically what happens historically is the oligarchs come at that, the beheading is a usurpation of power. They come in and kind of push you more into their agenda, either a new egregore or sort of a new way of seeing things. So the lone nut thing, I think, can almost be attributed to, in some ways, what we're dealing with Epstein. Was he alone? Was he connected to some agency in the Middle East? And on and on. And you've seen the clickbait ads over and over. And like I said on Wednesday, we're all guilty of checking these things out, at least seeing what was going on at the Diddy trial. Your inquiring minds want to know. But what we're asking here, is there truly an alchemical working, not just for part of a society anymore, or like in a world war, many more people around a grand narrative, like a big number out of World War II that casts the same kind of spell? So anyway, we're going to talk just a little bit briefly up here to kind of give you a sense of what we're going to be saying. I've talked so much here. As long as I've talked this much, I'll lay one more idea. Here's just a phrase from, again, the 1992 book by Michael Hoffman. He says in Society, Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare, part of the process of the alchemical principle involving the revelation of the method, it's this clown-like, and you remember when the kid was getting into the car, this clown-like grinning mockery of the victims as it shows a show of power, macabre arrogance. When there is no meaningful response from the public, but it's just used as a more amusement, more titillation, it has succeeded. One of the fundamental points I think I'd want to get across, and I'm going to let these guys talk, I swear, is there something called truth or consequences? We're living in an era of externalization. Alice Bailey said that in her famous book in 1957. She was involved in the UN meditation room and these other societies, and she predicted 2025 would be a year of externalization of the hierarchy. Who's behind it? When you think about what Tucker Carlson is saying, what Candace Owens is saying, I would have never imagined 2 years ago this would be out in the public. This is part of a big plan, and you're thinking, why do they externalize this? And this is this folding of consciousness. And yes, there's elements of WrestleMania involved in that, some truth, some lies, some truth, some lies, some kayfabing involved in it. But it's an ancient alchemical technique. This is not new at all. So one of the ideas here is when there's no meaningful pushback, one of the takeaways we're going to have today is the material that we talk about on Memory Hole Fridays. The mind of the church, especially from 1880 to 1945, all the bishops, the cardinals, the priests, the monsignors that we're talking about, yes, the JQ. That is part of, I'm writing this book. Can I plug things any more than I am right now? I'm toward the end of the first draft with the book, Saints of the Apocalypse. I believe that's what they're trying to tell us right now. We have to get back to that teaching of the church that was blurred in Vatican II, especially Notre Aetate. It's where God designed us to be able to see our enemies and be able to operate, see their techniques, to be smart as serpents. So we're not taking the leaven of this group who is metaphysically designed to attack the church, to attack our consciousness, and to put us into a world slave system. So I've talked so much. I'm going to take a breath, and I'm just going to, you're in front of us right now. John Carter, do you have any initial responses? Because when you're first reading it, let me just say it's about 120 pages. There's about 40 really good pages that he was ahead of his time. Some of it does drift. Catholic State mentioned off air that he wished to use a few more footnotes and stuff like that. But I think he did read a lot of these old magic books, and I think he nailed a couple really important ideas that we should be aware of. What do you think, John Carter?
I agree, Dr. Haugen. This book is for someone who's got already some background in what's going on, to put it into context. And just the fact that we're talking about Hermeticism or alchemy, Gnosticism, we're talking about hidden knowledge. So we're talking about madness. And to try to understand how a mad person, you can't fix crazy. And so we're trying to fix reading about this stuff and trying to unwind what's happening around us. And I think the most important point for me from the book, I read it twice, was that alchemy is not somewhere over there. We're in the middle of the soup. And when we realize we're in the middle of the soup and we don't have the protection of Holy Mother Church anymore, that she's been neutered, and really haven't had her protection since the French Revolution and the collapse of the monarchies, whereby states were beholden to Christ as their king and not just people, that we don't have that protection anymore. And so that pot with the frog in it, that water's been getting hotter and hotter, and generation after generation is born into that pot. So reading this book makes me realize how screwed up my own mind has been, and how reading these things, it's so hard to separate ourselves from reality. And I think that's why truly to be spiritual in these times, you need to go find a mountain and go and be a hermit, because it's everywhere, and you fall into these traps nonstop. The book is it does a good job of bringing out some case studies like Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, about Son of Sam. And then we can really put that into context today, and you can see the signs all around us, whether it be the flood or other recent events. So
Excellent, John. And before I get to you, John Carter, we all fall into this. We grew up in this system, because one of the things I want to highlight I developed this channel about this concept that I do in politics called biopolitics. There's been coding embedded in our institutions and into indeed our very constitution. And it's what he calls a twilight language. And it induces double-mindedness. Bear in mind, scripture tells us not to be double-mindedness. And you can see it constantly in this week. Trump over here, we're going to have the files. We're not going to have the files. It's an induced psychosis, induced cognitive dissidence. And maybe he's doing it he's got a handler next to him right now. And we're going to go into that on the side. But when we do, just, a big theme that we're going to hit on next week again in Memory Hole is the Star-Spangled heresy. Americanism is a key egregore that we're still attached to. And I know there's not a lot of people saying Catholics pull out of this, but it's embedded in the very Constitution, in our legal structure, in our institutions. And it's actually part of a Kabbalistic control mechanism. And so, yeah, whether we're talking about P. Diddy over here, or all of the Epstein stuff, you have to be aware. What are they not? There's people bombing churches. There's people beheading Christians. And instead, we're just listening to this pitter patter. And before I go to Catholic State, I just want to, just one sentence from here. The role assigned to us, Goyam, the role assigned to us is that of zombies called upon by our shadow masters to perform bit parts and act as stock characters in their spectacular show, i.e., as I say, the spectacle or the empire of spectacle. This mesmerizing process produces a demoralized, cynical, double mind. And that's exactly, they say, Fauci says, you don't need a mask next week, you got to stand 6 feet. Everybody needs one. Did he just say that by accident? It's part of the programming, and it's helpful to identify it. And again, we're immune to this. We've been zombied down. We've been dead. People that call themselves Christian will not talk about something that's been externalized on the world stage by God, I argue. They have a controlled externalization, but God's external. Do you feel anything? Again, Christ is calling. What you do to the least among you, you do to me. And people can talk about Jesus until the sun comes down and not mention it. And that induces you. So this idea of truth or consequences, that's the externalization. They put it out, and they're boldly put it out. And if there's no pushback, they're more empowered. Now, I don't know. Maybe they did overstep this time a little bit with the, Pan Bondi thing and all of this. But that's the technique. No pushback. They're metaphysically, demonically empowered. That's why they have the externalization. And the more you do know, you have no excuse when you stand in front of God. Yes, he's connected to the Mossad. Yes, it's true. Yes, the JQ thing is true. Yes, you've been ignoring it, saying, is it all the, yes, there's a conspiracy against God and man, Christ and his church. And all of that is true. So Justin, sorry it took so long to get around you. How you doing? And by the way, Justin, give a plug for what you're up to in your channel and everything.
Yeah, well, I've actually been kind of like not posting as much in the past couple weeks. I've been busy with other things, but my channel is on Rumble. It's called Christ the King. So look me up on Rumble, Christ the King, or if you look up the Catholic State, you'll find me too. But or go to my website, christtheking.info or thecatholicstate.com. But anyways, yeah, this book, there is, like you guys say, a lot of good things that are in there. And before we started, I have to pick one thing that sticks out. One of the big things that stick out to me is kind of how the revolution, as you would call it, right? The revolution itself promises freedom and liberty and justice for all, and their whole preamble for the revolution is fighting tyranny, because they're essentially, their script is Christendom is tyrannical, right? These, and as we'll even admit as Catholics that there have been awful popes and awful bishops and awful Christian kings, etc. But that's their preamble, is that all the popes and bishops and kings are bad. Like, come to us, we'll bring you something good. And that's just not true. I mean, the tree by the fruits. And what we've seen from the revolution is, the French Revolution, for instance, they call it the revolution. And look at what we did. But really, from a Catholic standpoint, it's the reign of terror. They they killed nuns. I mean, they literally martyred and beheaded nuns and other religious and people that were just professing the Catholic faith. And that's really how it is. If you look at like communist Russia, it's the same thing. Under Lenin and Stalin, millions and millions and millions of Russian Orthodox Christians died. And they're schismatic, they're outside the church, but they died for professing Christ Jesus, right? And I mean, that's really the big thing. One of the big things here is that the organized naturalism, as Father Fahey would call it, which is the synagogue and the Freemasons, which are really the called out in this book. They're promoting evil and calling it good. They're promoting, like they will, like on the TV, like he points out, like you watch TV, they will say they will say the right things. Sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, we're going to have on the news talking about, these sexual perversions and these murders and stuff. And then at the same time, while that news program is going on, you have ads for like things like Miami Vice type stuff, which is just, shows that are nothing but violent and showing women in scantily clad bikinis, caressing guns. You know what I'm saying? So it's like they say the right thing. They put out, like, Trump and all these, they put out banners for freedom, liberty, justice for all. But at the same time, all they're pushing is evil. And they're doing it right in your face. It's insane. It's diabolical. It absolutely is. And that's probably one of the main takeaways from this book is they call evil good and good evil, and you have to be vigilant and look out for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot there with what you just said, Justin, for sure. It's embedded in everything. The synagogue, I mean, I think people here are aware of that, who owns Hollywood, et cetera, et cetera. But I think a lot of people think they're watching something kind of benign on Netflix, and it's really threaded into everything. And there's a fine line between going down a lot of rabbit holes and doing endless conspiracy into the darkness. That's not the idea. Where we're coming from is the balanced middle, is to have the mind of the church that did call these things out through the lens of the church. because when you kind of do come from that higher plane, I figured out that Vatican II is a hoax, and so I'm over here, or I figured out that we didn't go to the moon, so I'm over here, and you kind of have that higher level of looking down on people. That is a type of Gnostic thinking, that you kind of have a special vantage point upon humanity, and it is dangerous. And the mind of the church and what we stress over here in the material on locals, links are in the description. We began, the Metaverse book from a Platonic idea baptized by the church, that we look, at God's creation in an openly, with a strong sense of humility and charity. But we also kind of realize we're living in a time there really aren't many magic bullets. It's the passion of the church. It's a difficult time. And so one of the key things, as we're learning this necessary information, that this twilight language, this Kabbalah, has been threaded into everything to identify it, but kind of maybe don't get lost in all the gruely darkness of it all. But before I go to you, John, and we can kind of head out, one of the things that I think we're going to talk about over there is how Catholics do get caught up in this. John has gone on and on about these networks that are connected to patriotism. And the devil wants to capture traditional Catholicism. He wants to pervert its liturgy and its theology. And obviously, he made a lot of progress, in the early 1960s. But still, we get people that call themselves this, that are working for organizations funded by the synagogue. And John's unthreaded all these different networks. It's very clear who's funding them, and it's very clear what the agenda is, what they can talk about and what they can't talk about. And so this Americanism that they're pushing is very dangerous, and that's one of the things we want to highlight. The idea or the phrase has been kicked around now for a month or two, called Trad Inc. And no, I don't think you all are a crazy cabal. I think the synagogue, and who we talk about with Professor Bezerra, is indeed a cabal. They're in a metaphysical position in the cosmic conspiracy against God and man, Christ and his church, to create a new world satanic order. And so, yes, there is one, and people do form, sociologically speaking, networks. And to be able to hang, there's things you say and things you don't say. And yeah, you can have a guest come on and say a couple things, but the key part here is you have to speak out against this. I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm being judgy and all this stuff over here. This is what we're on. This is Americanism. This is an egregore. This has a demonic ontology. And before I continue any further here, in the church, this is where it gets tricky. 20 years ago, there was all the scandal. Now there's more scandal. You see a whole people that do a stock and trade in Catholic influencer land about scandals daily. Some people can produce 2 thumbnails a day with all the sensational thumbnail artwork, about all of the abuses in the church. And do we want to be mindful of it? Yes. But there's also a technique that can be put into that. So I think the bottom line here is that we have voices in the church, and we go through them that say, yes, the goal here, there is a cabal. That's teaching from the church. I'm not coming up with that. That's their goal, to enslave humanity. And we corroborate this week after week with monsignors, fathers, bishops, and cardinals that have spoke out, but it's been memory hold, and Trad Inc. won't touch it. So to the extent that they don't touch it, I do talk about that, or I think that phrase is kind of handy. Not for me to come into you all, but for you guys to start talking about it. Again, we're going into this. We're going to leave the show in a minute, and we're going to dig into a lot of parts of the book. Links are in the description. I encourage people to come and join our Catholic community. And it's $5 a month to what you call be a supporter, be able to participate, and be able to watch the videos. John Carter, I know you have some closing ideas for our YouTube audience here.
Sure. I think the most important is that if we're watching this today, that everyone is on a search for truth. And That trail is full of tripwires, and and every time you get to a intersection, a Y intersection, and you have to make a decision: is the Catholic Church the whore of Babylon? Is it the Jesuits? Everywhere you go, you have chaff. The higher you go, the more chaff you got in the air to distract us from the target. And once you get to the real enmity, then it's like freedom. But on that trail, a lot of people will fall off and get injured. And he does explain that. Hoffman explains it in the book, is that this matrix, this alchemical cesspool, is like a vortex. When you come into this vortex, it's spinning, and they've already inserted something in the system 50 years ago. By the time you figure out, they're already 50 years ahead of us. And so it's almost a fool's errand to try to unwind this. What's important is to be able to identify the tripwire and not understand why they want to kill us, but how they're trying to kill us. That's what I take away from it. Otherwise, it incites our passions, our anger, our fear, etc. And I think we got to guard ourselves against that. And he makes that plain. Is on this trail of truth, there lie the countless bones of millions who have died trying to figure this stuff out. So.
Yeah, before I finish off with you, Justin, I'll say what you just said, John. Before I did this stuff for years before I started the channel 8 years ago. And I'll just make some quick observations. Catholic State mentioned, they want to say you're bad. And we talked about that's how you create an egregore. It's called the apathetic negation of reality or of being. So God is positive, and they take a critique. You're critiquing God. You're critiquing the church to make a new church. You're going to take elements of the real and make the artificial. So sometimes I pick on Martin Luther. I like these sacraments. I don't like this. I'll call transubstantiation something. And he's going to create his own church, and it gets the point. So me being around the truth community for a long time, John said there's a lot of tripwires. Before I get to the tripwires, let me go back to, for example, Calvin. Everything about the Catholic Church is terrible. So we're going to smash the stained glass, smash the statues, because we're operating at a higher level. We don't need those peasant visual things, right? And next thing you know, they're burning people at the stake. They're imprisoning people for foul language, just doing everything the church would do, or even worse. And they're having their own inquisitions. So they're always going to critique. And then they're pretty much probably going to go into a deeper level in many cases of a totalitarian heresy. But I don't want to be all over, but I was in the truth community for a number of years. And a lot of things, like somebody reminded me of an error. People start like, what's the shape of the earth? And, did we go to the moon? And they have a feeling suddenly they're operating at this higher vantage point, and they're looking for something different in scripture. That's why it's called the matrix. We're getting away from that word because you think you're red pilled, but you're still voting for Trump. You think you found out this stuff. But what I found is at the end of the day, most of those truthers that are Christians end up not going to any church. They're all 501c3. They're all part of the scam. So you become your own pope entirely. And you just literally pick out. That's a very dangerous thing. Martin Luther at the end of his life said, there's as many heretics as there are heads. What have I created? And it's just God's demand is for us to have unity in, first of all, we get that through, I mentioned last week, one of the most personal things we can do is consume Christ in a personal relationship. But at the same time, it's this bizarre thing that we're connected with everybody in the church through, that's the unity that we have. And it answered the ancient problem of the one and the many that ancient philosophy couldn't get over. And only through supernatural grace could God have instilled this institution in man of the Eucharist. And I'm kind of getting to a different place, but most truthers will never come upon that most fundamental truth of Christianity. You can solve the problem of the one and many. We can have a personal most significant and profound personal relationship with Christ, and yet be tied at the same time to the one body, his body and the mystical body of Christ. Truthers are all miss that. They end up being their own popes. They criticize everything. And in their own minds, they are the worst. I'm sorry, there's going to be non-Catholics listening to this and go berserk and stuff like that. But that's what we think from a Catholic perspective. It's very rare somebody goes from trutherism like I did into Catholic. It's very rare. So I'm saying there are so many tripwires. What I was reminded of this morning is something called Catholic roots. People say, oh, there's a firmament and we didn't go there. And they come into this thing, and Father sent me a video this morning, and it had a guy talking about the synagogue of Satan. And the only person that talks about this is this channel that is Catholic. There's Hebrew roots, and they're Judaizers. They want you to come in and be under the old law. So they're going to give you this crazy truth, like I see the synagogue and no other Christians are talking about it, but then they want to enslave you into the old law. And it's the door is very narrow. And how I always protect myself when I'm talking about all this stuff. Yes, we do want to be wise as serpents. We want to understand that the Pharisees are the synagogue. They're alive. The agenda's in place so that we do not take their leaven. And part of their leaven is they were instigators in the Protestant Revolution. They want us to be separated and detached and make everything up by ourselves. It's so what I always just say to cover myself is just return to reality, which is the mystical body of Christ, which is this Catholic social order. Return to the bosom of Christ. Now we're in the Passion of the Church, and that's a whole nother can of worms, but we're still miles ahead of where we're going to be anyplace else, dealing with the crisis in the church with a sense of honesty and openness, charity and humility. And I guess that's my spiel for today. Justin, do you want to finish with something?
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you guys said. Yeah, like these people, like I was saying before, are calling good evil and evil good. But, we can't fall into the snare of being reactionaries. I mean, Father Dennis Fahey talks about this, and there's some other good fathers, like Father Charles Coughlin, the radio priests. Mm-hmm. There's other good priests in the early 20th century for obvious reasons that talked about this. We can't fall into this reactionary mentality of like, okay, it's the synagogue, so we should hate them, or it's the Freemasons, so we can hate them. Hate is not something we can do as Catholics. As Catholic Christians, we must love our enemies. Christ commanded that. And that doesn't mean we don't acknowledge who our enemies are, but that means we got to love them, we got to pray for them, and we got to will the best for them. So knowledge is important, and that's what we're giving here. We're just simply promulgating the knowledge that the church was open about before mid 20th century, or at least the early mid 20th century. But at the same time, we gotta have a sober mind in imbibing this knowledge and realize that ultimately what we're going to do with this knowledge is we're going to be vigilant, right? Vigilance is a virtue. We're going to avoid being bamboozled by these evil powers that are trying to ensnare us, and we're going to work to do our best to restore Christendom, to restore Christianity, to convert people, and to bring Jesus and Mary to the world.
That was beautiful. I like that, Justin. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was very nice. There is a temptation in our time, and it's an old Gnostic temptation to look for a magic bullet. If for Marxists, if we could just remove the capitalists, we would be in a Garden of Eden. For the Nazis, if we could just remove the Jews, and a lot of our, sometimes if we could just go back to the traditional Latin Mass. When we go back to the bosom of the church, we will see a passion, and there's not going to be magic bullets, and it will involve suffering, because that's part of holding reality together, the transcendent and the immanent frame, hanging in the middle. We must suffer as Christ suffered in that spot. And so that's just a reminder that there's a temptation to think if we just simply did. That's not saying that one public policy can't be better than the other. But what we are arguing over here is the flaws, the demonic flaws embedded in modern democratic constitutions that produce this disease called Americanism that we're going to talk about in depth next week, is a overworked word, mind virus. It's an egregore. And we have to understand how it really takes us away from the fullness of Catholic truth. And that's part of our journey, is to bring our minds, bodies, and souls back to base reality. Any final words for us, our YouTube audience, John?
Well, I think it's ignorance is bliss and knowledge is suffering.
Yeah.
And this comes down to iniquity, and Christ hung on the cross for my sins, for what I've done. And so I will look at myself before I point the finger at anybody else. But I think what is self-evident is that the Pharisees, they seed the ground with temptation all around us. And without the church to guard against it, they've pretty much taken over society globally. And how are we going to survive this if we don't stay within the bark of Peter? That's my last statement.
Amen.
Yeah. Yep. If you're Catholic, a final thing, I guess I'll leave that I did. I'm telling this to myself, but I've been reading lately about purgatory. And part of the book, the thesis of this book, how we kind of go from Christianity to anti-Christian civilization, anti-Christian world order. I call it millennial dreams, political religion. So first of all, it problematizes the millennium, which is the church, and it wants to put it in the future, put it on earth. It creates political religions like Americanism, communism, all these isms outside of what was the Catholic social order, which was that the theology is on top of the politics. And finally, it gets us into this Elon Musk, tech bros vision of reality, and the robots are coming, man. I've seen all that stuff. But here's what I've noticed with what I'm learning is what we call the communion of saints, the millennial kingdom. It has the church, and I know Catholics know this. So it's the church triumphant, which is heaven. It's the church militant, which is our space right now. We're in an inaugurated eschatology, already not yet. We have one foot in the door. We're looking toward the beatific vision, and we share all of this with the church suffering. So I know this isn't the sexiest thing you can say right now, but part of what I'm really feeling to return to reality, people want to, what do you want me to do? It's when we do our rosaries, really buckle down and pray for the suffering souls in purgatory. And I think that's why the Blessed Mother especially wanted us to pray the rosary during this Passion period, and that she said it would be especially efficacious. So I myself just want to be mindful that I am praying for the suffering souls and trying to stay as much as I can, make the trips over to confession, staying in a state of grace. So thank you all. Again, links will be in the description for locals. We're going to hop over there and do our regularly scheduled show, and we're going to be back with our Brazilian professor friend and talk about a little bit more about the agenda to enslave humanity and how we can understand that better.